এটা ওই যে আমাদের রেকর্ডিং এর যে এটা
Amrita, do let us know when to start.
Few more participants are joining, Shukadi.
Okay, okay.
पेपर में इस पेपर में हम सीरियल नंबर लिखते हैं 1 2 3 4 ऐसे क्यूरिंग एड वालों की एक अलग से लाइन होगी जिनको वो सीरियल नंबर दिया जाएगा ऑन चेक्स एंड अलग से लाइन अगेन ये 1 2 3 4 वाला चिट्स दी जाएगी.
Amrita, keep all the participants in mute, please.
Okay, okay.
So, Kanya, we can start. I think Dr. Chatterjee is there.
Okay, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Bengal Chambers CSR National Committee and the CSR Foundation, we welcome you all. And today we are most fortunate to have amongst us the father of Indian CSR, the ex-Director General of ICA, which is under the ministry. We welcome you, sir, and we thank you for giving us time from your busy schedule. I would request the chairman of our committee, Mr. Jitendra Kumar, to say a few words and welcome, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to each and everyone present in this talk show. So we are here to listen Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee. So nothing more from my side. So I request you to come and enlighten this August gathering, sir. Over to you, Dr. Chatterjee.
Thank you, Jitendra. Thank you, Shukarna. And a big thank you to the Bengal Chamber of Commerce for giving me this opportunity to be here this afternoon and to address our fellow participants on a subject very close to all our hearts, which is CSR, of course. But what I chose to do today is to try to visit the origins of Indian CSR. How did it come about? And what has been this journey that we have done over 1 decade? As you know, uh, the law actually comes into force from the 1st of April 2014. On the 1st of April 2024, we completed 1 decade of what one might call mandated CSR. So it is a time when we can step back a bit and reflect on what has been this journey. Why did we undertake this journey? What were the thoughts which we invoked at the beginning of this journey? What was the rationale for coming up with a legislation on CSR? Why was it perceived as a necessity in the first place? And we will try and begin to trace all of it and bring it right up to the current time, the current scenario. And I will be very happy if I am interrupted as often as required. Any comments that you have, any questions that you have, anything that crosses your mind while the story unfolds, please share it on the chat so that I can see it and be happy to take those comments along in the course of what I have to say to you. As you can see, if we can have the first slide up, Shukarna, just share the slides now.
Okay. Amrita,
Yes,
have you
sharing.
received the slides?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
share it.
Is it visible?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the important thing, as I've said, 1 decade, and that's what we will talk about. But the important word in this title is strategic CSR. And as the story unfolds, you will understand what I mean by strategic CSR. The point I wish to make is that not that CSR was not happening in this country before the law came into operation. All of us know that there's such a big Indian tradition of giving. So many great companies actually did a whole lot of CSR even before the law came into operation. And that is doubtless true. In fact, the doubting Thomases said at the time when we were conceiving the legislation that what's the point of having a legislation when, in any case, so many companies and so many firms are doing CSR and doing it pretty well? Why do we need a law at all? And that is why this word strategic becomes even more important. Doubtless they were, but in what form, in what shape, how were they doing it? Was it public knowledge or not? Were companies responsible for the work that they were doing in giving back to society? What was up in the public domain? What was common knowledge? At what levels were decisions being taken? All of this was not known to the public at large. And certainly, the idea behind the legislation was to get corporates to come and talk about what they were doing, to get involved in the national agenda of development. And that's where really the thought process began. Did it start with the legislation? Of course not. The origins of strategic CSR actually lie in the public sector. And let me then take you to the first of my slides. Please go to the next one. Yeah. So, happily or otherwise, in India, charity began at home in the sense that we brought CSR first to Indian public sector before we legislated for the private sector. And then in the Department of Public Enterprises, we wrote the first ever guidelines for public sector enterprises. And in a way, the history of modern strategic CSR in India begins not on the 1st of April 2014, but actually on the 1st of April 2010, because it is there that the first guidelines were written. We formulated a strategy on how public sector undertakings, numbering about 250, should actually take forward their CSR activities. And some of the thoughts that were discussed then and some of the thoughts that were incorporated in those guidelines actually became the precursor and the basis on which the legislation itself was framed. Section 135 was brought into the picture. So if you look here, there were 3 or 4 things that actually originated in the thought process. When any one of you is sitting in a position of framing policy, that too in a subject as sensitive as CSR, the least that you can do to yourself and to the nation is to try and understand what has gone before, not just in India, but even globally. And I now recall that in that space in 2009 to the 1st of April 2010, I was voraciously reading every single word that I could find on CSR across the globe. And I remember at the time reading from Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize winner on economics. And it was very often said to me that even his quotation is the business of doing the give back of business is in fact business. The real words that he wrote were not these. The words that he wrote, and I'm quoting, the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. These are the actual words that he wrote. So the business of doing business is often said by others, but the actual words he wrote are the ones that I read out to you. And he forwarded the theory of shareholder value. Basically meant that every company must cater to the interests of its shareholders. And in the marketplace, that's all that counts. From there, of course, we moved on and we go to 1994. 1994 marks a watershed in the history of thinking about give back to society. And why do I say that? Because that is the year in which John Elkington wrote his very famous book, which he called Cannibals with Forks, the triple bottom line of the 21st century. And you can imagine the kind of imagery that he wished to portray, that profit-seeking, shareholder maximizing private sector companies were exactly that. They were people with forks who were actually cannibalizing society. And because of that strong imagery, the idea of people, profit, planet, which he then propounded, the 3 Ps, became such a guiding post for all of us who were contemplating what should be the role of the corporate sector in a modern society. We moved from 1994 John Elkington to 2004, and I remember voraciously reading C.K. Prahlad, our own C.K. Prahlad from Hyderabad, who of course made his name in the US. And in that very famous book, Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, he showed us that those at the bottom of the pyramid, what corporates can do for them and how they can stand by them. Of course, we had to acknowledge that Prahlad's thesis was also about making profits from the bottom of the pyramid. The idea was that corporates should design such products in very large numbers, and bulk purchasing by those at the bottom of the pyramid would actually contribute to the profits of large companies. But nevertheless, the first awakening after John Elkington as to what the bottom of the pyramid looks like was initiated by C.K. Prahlad. And then the next, and perhaps the most important one, which guided our thought process then, was the idea of shared value, which Michael Porter and Mark Kramer first brought to the attention of the entire world in 2006. Those ideas of how corporates would create value and then share it with those who are not so fortunate in our society also generated a great deal of attention across the globe. Let me say that these thought processes were the ones that actuated my own thinking and all the people who were with me in the Committee in Public Enterprises at the time. And we then began to think, how should we write an Indian CSR perspective? Something that is not from the US or from the UK, something that is suited to Indian society, to our own environment. How can we make sure that our vision of CSR serves our society and our nation? And that's why in the guidelines of 2010, some new concepts and ideas came into being. Very briefly, you can see that we were looking at implementation agencies. We were looking at aligning a lot of the efforts with state, district, and local government initiatives. We were even at the time talking of sustainable development. And this, if you just scroll up a bit, yeah. And most importantly, what you will see here is this gradation. Less than 100 crore, 100 crore to 500 crore, 500 crore and above of net profits. You can see that we had gone from a range of 0.5 to 2% up to 5%. And this, to some extent, if you can scroll up a little bit, can we see the slide down at the bottom? Yeah. This bandwidth that you see here at the bottom, this was averaged out when we made the law and rounded it off to 2%. Many have asked me subsequently that where did this 2% come from? It actually came from the public sector guidelines, which we wrote way back in 2010. All right, next slide, please. Now, 3 or 4 important thoughts actuated us, and these are really the beginnings of strategic CSR. First of all, we said that if you do not make profits, there's no point in doing CSR. If you don't have anything to give, there's not much you can give back to society. So it is important for us to earn profits first, stabilize ourselves at a certain level of profits, and then only can we go forward into serving society with the resources now available to us. At that time, of course, and this gets clarified much later by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, we had also ensured that whatever you can't spend in a particular year by any public sector undertaking would be carried forward to the next year. We had talked of baseline surveys, we talked of detailed documentation, we talked of monitoring, we talked about annual reports. Much of what you see in the legislation that you now all know so well were actually thought of back then in 2010. Then, parallelly, as we were doing this, in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, the National Voluntary Guidelines were released. This was a parallel happening in July of 2011. Because of that, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs began to think at the time about the law itself, whether we should now convert to a law, and whether now in the new Companies Act, which at that time was being drafted, a section should be included in the Companies Act itself. That time, of course, it was a bill. Next slide, please. So now as we transitioned from public sector to the private sector at large, and to bring within the ambit the entire gamut of corporate activity in the country, we have this bold paradigm shift, which we make in the Act of 2013, making it operative from the 1st of April 2014. Now, a lot of stakeholder consultations were done prior to the actuating the law. At the time, needless to say, the resistance and opposition to any such law reached its height. Corporates, by and large, kept coming to the parliamentary committee and stating their very fervent objections as to what this law and why we should not have it. Many actually went at the time to the extent of saying that if at all you want 2%, then just give it, take it from us as a tax, but don't impose the burden of legislation on us. Now, in hindsight, of course, all that appears hardly relevant, but that was the thinking then. Many said that, if government needs the money, just take it from us. And our reply to them was, government doesn't need your money. We want you to contribute directly to society as such. That money is yours. You do the work that you would want to do. And you will see, of course, later on how flexible we made that legislation and how much elbow room we allowed to corporates to pretty much do their own thing. One of the really important things that happened at the time, and I will talk about this a bit more later, is that for India, we also brought in civil society in a very big way. Many of you would know that there are approximately 3 million NGOs in this country. And we also felt that why should corporates actually get into the implementation of CSR at ground level? They are not built for that purpose. And if they were to outsource such activity to civil society organizations who actually live and work among communities, then it would be a much better way to implement our CSR. So, of course, the idea then was that it's not just government which must look after the poor. If we can have corporates also contributing to the upliftment of society, there would be a tremendous amount of value add. Two or three other things we realized was that in many of the government programs, there's a large element of bureaucracy, large element of difficulty in connecting the last mile, whereas the private sector has greater efficiencies, greater agility, greater capacity to innovate, supervise execution, and in that sense, bringing the private sector into the inclusive development of our nation would be a tremendous step for India as a nation to take. Next slide, please. Now, for all practitioners, this is a very important diagram or an image that I have created. It's easy for us then to understand what Indian CSR is all about. And at the apex of this pyramid, you will see that government sits there, which is the regulator and also the facilitator. At the two ends of the base of the pyramid, on one side you find corporates, which do the funding, the monitoring, and the evaluation. And on the right-hand side of the base, you find NGOs, societies, Section 8 companies who would do the actual implementation of these projects and programs. Once having got this concept clear, we were then able to bring in some very important aspects of what should go into the Indian legislation. And there are these very important 9 key concepts that I wanted to bring to your attention. The first of this is elevating CSR decision making to the board level. Today, the idea is that there is a board level CSR committee. The plan for CSR is drawn up by this committee. It is recommended to the board accepts it, and all the activities that are undertaken in CSR through the CSR committee have the approval of the board. It's often said as a Chatterjeeism that we took CSR from the back room to the boardroom. Are any one of you who are listening to this would like to comment on what you feel about why this decision to take it to board level was important? Many of you were actually doing this CSR before. What difference has it made in ensuring that decisions are now taken at the highest level? The best brains of the company are there at the board, and because they are now applying their minds, the decisions now become more strategic, more futuristic, and integrated with the values as well as the corporate vision of the entity. If you feel like commenting in the chat, please go ahead and do so. The second thing that I wanted to say is that by elevating it to the board, we now have much higher levels of transparency and accountability. All of you are aware that now the regulations have led to a lot of disclosure on the kind of programs and projects that you can take on, how much you must put on your website, what must come into your annual report. Pretty much all that you do in CSR now is transparent, and those who actually decide what to do and those who actually implement it on the ground are pretty much held accountable by the current law and also by the whole CSR ecosystem. I took you back to that bandwidth which I showed you, the 3 bands, and how we integrated all of that into the idea of 2%. Again, this is a concept which is completely new to the world. This is an Indian concept which we brought in. This, what I call POP, or percentage of profit, is something that is completely innovative. It was unknown anywhere in the world before. It was a completely original idea which we brought into the picture. Similarly, now saying that those who have uh, 5 crores of net profits over 3 years, 500 crores of net worth, 1,000 crores of turnover, this financial thresholds which we specified are also completely unique to India. I did not find any of these concepts which we introduced discussed anywhere in any paper in any part of the globe. In all of the writings of the people I mentioned before this, whether it's Elkington or Friedman or Porter or Kramer or Prahlad, this idea was never ever espoused. So these are the new things we did for the Indian legislation. Right, I'm getting some nice comments on the side, which also I am reading as I speak. Correct. This is a very good comment which has come up in the chat. Devdan Mukherjee, all of you can read it. It is exactly espouses the reason why we took it into the board level. Thank you, Devdan. Now, the implementation by civil society organizations. This again is a completely new feature. Initially, most of the reservations about corporate entities, and when they came to the parliamentary committee, they would frequently say that how can corporates give money to NGOs? NGOs are a moving target. They're here today, gone tomorrow. They're completely untrustworthy. How can we repose faith or trust in NGOs? NGOs, of course, would also, yes, Ajay, you have raised your hand. Please put a comment on the side in the chat where I can see it, and I'll be happy to answer your question. Are we available for Ajay Gupta to say a few words?
Yes, sir.
Ajay,
Please
go ahead.
unmute Ajay Gupta. Amrita, can you unmute Mr. Ajay Gupta?
Yes, we have requested him to unmute.
Okay. So, Mr. Gupta, can you now hear us? Sorry, speak? We have given you the rights. Can you just unmute from your computer and speak?
He has unmuted. Now, Mr. Gupta, you can speak.
Sorry, we can't hear you. Then please put the message on the chat box.
Yes, Ajay, you are on mute, but if you are not audible, then please feel free to write a message on the chat box. It'd be very helpful. So now, many people asked me that, Dr. Chatterjee, you're bringing about this legislation and you're talking about CSR. Don't we have a right to know what the government means by CSR? Where is the definition of CSR anywhere in the law or in the rules or anywhere, anything that government has ever put out by clearly telling us what is CSR? What does government mean by that? And straightforward answer is that no definition is available anywhere in the law or the rules. And that is a conscious decision which government took, for the simple reason that when you try to define something, it then becomes subject to interpretation. Everyone would have his or her own views on what CSR should be, and many of them would then interpret anything that government said in their own way. And hence, from the beginning, from day one, what was said is that any activity which has been identified in Schedule 7 would be considered as CSR. If not, then it would not be considered as CSR. NGOs need unrestricted funds to grow and consolidate. I don't think corporates would agree, but I'll get into that later. Now, the other point is at point 8, which again is a famous Chatterjeeism, and it says that CSR must be project-based. And the idea here is if it is not a project, it is not CSR. So everything in CSR has to have a start date, is to have an end date. There must be a value attached to that project. There must be a baseline survey. There must be a very clear monitoring. There must be a clear provision for impact evaluation. That's the only way that a project from end to end is taken care of, and what that project has actually done. Has it achieved the objective for which it was taken up? That is the important aspect. That's why it has to be project-based. Okay, we can now go to the next one. Let's now stop at the fact that this is all historical. This is how the thought process happened. This is how CSR was brought from what I would call intermittent off and on CSR, unplanned, to strategic CSR. And that era begins with the 1st of April of 2014. So what are the current trends that we see? First of all, the most important part is the mindset change that has happened in corporates. From initially being resistant to any form of legislation, to now largely accepting the CSR legislation as an opportunity rather than as a challenge. Yes, I'm just jotting down these points about 5%. Which is an important point, and I will address that query at the end of this. And I will also talk about the independent director, since I am one in several boards. So we will come to that also. Yeah. So board level governance and the idea of the independent director is important for us to know. Mostly you will find that the idea of the independent director as a member of the CSR committee is vital, because very often the boards, the CMD, and the other top officials of enterprises are pressurized by government and other outside sources to take up particular projects. And it was the belief that managements can then turn around to their independent director, who it is believed would have the ability and would have the position to take on any pressure from outside and to ensure that only quality projects. Yes, I will also talk about own foundations. Would ensure that quality projects are taken up. So an independent director has the position and the capacity to ensure that the company can resist outside pressure. Also, now there's been a great deal of awareness that you need not go it alone. Akla chalore is not always the solution. You can reach out to government agencies, you can reach out to other corporates, you can reach out to many other entities with whom you can partner so that by leveraging resources, each other's resources, the impact that you create is higher. We also find over these 10 years now, a lot of innovation has come into the process. One small example I've given here, that in addition to the midday meals which government provides, and of course, many companies also provide meals off and on. But last year was the year of millets. And in the Anil Agarwal Foundation, in our Nandkar program for Anganwadis, we were introducing millet bars. These are high energy bars and a very good supplement to what was being provided by way of midday meals. So such innovations, I find, this is only one example, are the way in which corporates are trying to increase the impact of their programs. Next, please. Sorry, I think we'll just go back a bit. There's current trends, 1 decade analysis. Yes, yes. So again, there's a lot of appetite on the part of corporates now to align with government schemes. So wherever you find that the last mile is missing, corporates are often stepping into that. For example, if you look at the employment schemes of government, there are occasions when we provide opportunities for providing daily wages to labor at times when there is scarcity of work. And in that National Rural Employment Program, you will see that very often a village tank is dug. And they dig it, let us say, to about 6 or 8 feet and leave it there because then the scheme gets over, the money is paid out, and the labor moves to another location. Now, if the corporate were to come in and say, all right, this can be a great opportunity for building a tank for the village, and it'll become a water storage tank. So they use their money to increase the depth of that tank, let's say to 12 or 14 feet. They also bund it on all sides. They create segregated spaces for cattle and for human water consumption. And it becomes such a tremendous asset to the village and to those around it. So by supplementing and complementing government schemes, but not duplicating them, a tremendous amount of bandwidth can be created. We also now see this trust deficit having been bridged to a large extent. The bonds between good NGOs and many corporates has been increasing. The trust factor has increased. And the way that NGOs actually operate are pretty much now an understanding of what corporates want. If there's a financial discipline that is required, a certain way in which corporates operate, NGOs have come to understand where corporates come from. And similarly, corporates actually get interested to know what is happening at the grassroots level. What kind of programs and projects should we make? Should we design? Can we do this in consultation with our implementation partners? And that has led to a great deal of dialogue, faith, and trust in each other. And this is one of the major takeaways from the 10 decades, from the 1 decade that we have seen CSR unfold in our country. Tremendous amount of, what should I say, importance given to the outcome oriented approach. In short, what is it that we have achieved by undertaking this program? What kind of social impact measurement can we put into place to tell us what exactly has happened in this area and what can we do to increase the impact that we are creating? And therefore, from that comes number 8, the external evaluation mandate. And many of you now who see the rules that have come about in January of 2001, January 22nd to be precise, you would see how much of emphasis there is now on external evaluation for projects of a value of more than 1 crore. A lot of companies have also brought in a great deal of technology, helpful tools to assess, to monitor, and to increase the overall impact of the programs that they are doing. So these are the 9 things I wanted to say are currently trending in the area of CSR. Next, please. So what is the current size of the CSR space? When we began this, and this is exactly, can you change the slide, please? 1 decade analysis. Let's go to the next one. Yeah. This is what the scenario looks like now. And you can see that we started at about 12,000 crores, 10,000 companies. Look where we are now. The companies have gone to 18,000, almost let's say 19,000 companies. So the number of companies by themselves have doubled. And it is amazing, and this is a question I want you to comment on. Let's say that there are 18,623 companies who are implementing CSR projects in the country. How many companies who actually come under the ambit of Section 135 have not spent a single pie in all these 10 years on CSR? Can any one of you write down some guess figures, guesstimates in the chat box as to how many companies have not spent a single pie from day one till now on CSR? Good call. Anyone else? Samir is fairly close. No, not that many. Less than 7. Anyone else? Yeah, go to less than 7. So the answer is that it is around 3,964. Around 4,000 companies still have not spent a single pie. I mean, therefore, many companies who are implementing are saying to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs that if there are people who can get away with not spending anything, then why are we spending? And so let me assure you that the names of all these companies are in our database. And very soon, and my last slide in my presentation today will tell you how we are moving now into a punishment regime. And the offenders, if we may call them that, will now be subjected to very, very severe No, I said those who fall within the ambit of Section 135. So no question of losses. Those who have fallen within the ambit of Section 135 for all of these 10 years, they never went below or made it a single loss, but still did not spend. And that is the reason why we see this. In the diagram on the right-hand side, when you look at the top 10 states where CSR expenditure has taken place, can you write on the chat why these states are at the top? Why has maximum almost 30% of the total expenditure has taken place in Maharashtra? Yes, and this answer, which has come up there on the right-hand side of the screen, is pretty much correct. Because mostly, yes, absolutely. Because the big companies are concentrated in the industrialized states, they prefer to spend close to where they are, maybe because they can monitor them better. But if you were to say, and sadly speaking, we will now, when we see that the northeastern states receive 0.9%, all the 8 sisters of the Northeast together get only 0.9% of funding. So then, what should government do? What would you do, or what would you want to do to correct this? First of all, do you feel that this needs to be corrected? If yes, how do you feel that we should go forward in government to try and correct this aberration? All your comments so far are correct. Most of them want it in their own vicinity. Most of them are located in the developed states. Yes, all that is absolutely correct. But if that is a fact, and we've noticed this successively over 10 years, then what is a way for us to change that? Any suggestions we'll be happy to see on the chat. All right, next, please. This is the part that I was trying to tell you. Because of the fact that there have been so very good suggestion. Should we have a law for spending in underserved areas? Should we incentivize? If we incentivize, then how should we incentivize? Any thoughts would be most welcome. Now, yes, there is a thinking of going to aspirational districts. Again, what companies are tending to do, it's not that Maharashtra has no aspirational districts. So even if you choose an aspirational district, you choose one in your own state. So the spread is not always useful. Reduction of taxes is one very good way. Now, what is happening, and I can just deviate for a bit, because the center is reluctant to provide any tax incentives. In my last conclave with Northeast states, I found that some of the Northeastern states are willing to make changes in state policy and say that those who are willing to come in with CSR funds, just like states have industrial policies where they give tax exemptions or tax holidays and things like that, those who come in with a certain threshold of, let's say, 5 crores or 10 crores over a period of 1 or 2 years, the Northeastern states are coming up with state CSR policies. I am currently working with 2 or 3 Northeastern states on developing state CSR policies, never tried before. This is a completely unique experiment. Should states have a CSR policy when they invite corporates to come to the state, invest their CSR money, and give some incentives to corporates to spend CSR money in their states. Is this a good idea or not a good idea? Happy to have your comments on the chat box. But it is being propagated, and we are working with some states on building such policies. So because now we have moved from comply or explain, which I began with, then we went to comply or pay fine. Now we are moving to comply or pay penalty. And between pay and penalty, which I have not mentioned here, we're trying to add the word heavy. So very soon, they are going to come up with penalties which may actually increase. Now, we can go to the next slide because I'd like to finish by 1 o'clock or so. Yeah. One of you asked, and correctly, and that's why I've kept the last 2 or 3 slides to the idea of ESG. And we know well that ESG today is a very, very commanding space. It is an area where a lot of attention of many agencies, government and otherwise, is going. The difference between CSR and ESG is simply this. One is mandated in law, the other is investor driven. Of course, now the ESG part, because of the BRSR report, also prepared by a group under me in the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, we prepared BRR to begin with. Then, of course, what we started as BRR2 has now become BRSR. And SEBI has now mandated that the top 1,000 companies by market capitalization necessarily must submit their BRSR reports. So, what is important for us to know is that ESG and CSR are very well integrated. Most companies, because for obvious reasons, do not want to set up a separate division or a separate department for ESG. So mostly the CSR heads are also what they call sustainability heads. And therefore, we have ESG and CSR pretty much integrated. So there is a strategic alignment. That's the way I put it. Also, you will see many practitioners of CSR. If you go to item number 4 in Schedule 7, you will see how futuristic we were when we wrote Schedule 7. At the time when we were writing Schedule 7, we had only the Millennium Development Goals. We didn't even have the SDGs with us. And yet, in item 4, we had taken the provision so that CSR monies could be spent in items connected with natural resources, with the environment, with the preservation of the quality of air and water and soil. All the items connected with the E part were also very much there. So what has happened is that ESG and CSR today are getting more and more aligned. Companies are happy to do both. What is noticeable to me in particular is that they are now using CSR funds for environmentally important projects. Because item 4 allows that to happen, the corporates who are interested in that area are using CSR funds for having more and more projects in the area of environment resilience, and various aspects of environment. So the slice of the pie, whereas it is still largely for education and health, but the element of climate-related projects and programs are actually going up. Okay, next. On the ESG front also, just as in CSR, we have a lot of measurement, a lot of understanding. What is not measured is often not done. And there's a lot of focus on CSR outcomes. So too now in ESG, yeah, this idea of sequestration, of course, is something that will take too much time, but I'll try and hint a little bit at what it means and why we are not so sure that they should be done. Okay, similarly, stakeholder engagement. A lot of companies now see that if they don't have their ESG reports readily available, if their ESG assessment is not done, if their ESG score is not evaluated, then there is a great deal of reluctance on the part of shareholders generally and lenders and investors in particular to work with such companies who have not brought their ESG scores up to par. So a lot of awareness today among corporates on what needs to be done on ESG, how to go about it. You will also see in many of you who are now actually looking at BRSR reports that the G part is also being heavily weighted. So how do corporate boards function? What are the governance elements? How good are they in actually running that company safely, securely, sustainably, and working hand to hand so that then, because of the climate of ESG being created, CSR initiatives also get a boost. Okay, next, please. So broadly, this is my conclusion. We are now seeing that CSR is a strategic responsibility, no longer a peripheral activity. It's not just an option, but something now corporates treat very seriously. Yes, information also we can talk about a little bit. We talked about backroom to boardroom. So yeah, the elevation of decision making to the highest levels in the company. And therefore, as I've said, and that's the word with which I've ended, that giving back to that society from which profits themselves have been drawn. And I think success cannot be achieved in a failing society. So that brings me to the end of what I had to say. But now I'll take a little bit of time to talk on the points that have been raised in the chat box. 5%. Let me make it clear, particularly to those NGOs who are here and to corporate CSR executives. This 5% of administrative cost relates only to companies, not to NGOs. Therefore, NGOs who prepare their programs for execution can charge administrative costs up to any level they want. This is a discussion between them and the corporate entity which will fund them. So whether they charge 10% or 12% or 15% is really something that corporates and they should work out. But the administrative costs of NGOs are not limited to 5%. The 5% restriction is on what corporates can spend for undertaking their CSR activities within their own company. So the salaries of their staff, the travel of their staff, the administrative costs associated with having a CSR division or department. In short, overhead costs for the company only, not for NGOs. Should that be increased? to 10%, as one of you advised. Yes, it should be. That has been recognized very strongly. And this is one of the major recommendations that have been made to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So if there are changes, and I expect them to happen soon, then this will be one of the items where a change will come about. NGOs talk frequently about other foundations which are taking away from civil society organizations. And the fact is that when a foundation is created, the foundation does not implement any CSR activity on its own. It's a misnomer and a misconception that foundations implement CSR. Typically, foundations consist of about 5 or 6 persons which sit in the corporate office. They do no CSR on the ground. They are that part of the corporate entity which facilitates implementations. They engage NGOs. They in turn engage civil society organizations. It is their job to see that effective implementation actually takes place. And hence, NGOs are never denied their slice of what funding should come to them. What should we do for the Northeast? I think the general consensus which is emerging in government today is let's not legislate. We should try and keep legislation to the absolute minimum. It's better that we incentivize. Now, maybe at some point, the central government will also incentivize. In what form, I can't say. But quite possibly, they are now leaving it to the states to take the lead in the way that they can incentivize. Sequestration is always something that one has to consider very carefully. If you take the example of the Brazilian rainforests, you will see that much of the sequestration work done by corporates in the rainforests of Brazil, because of the felling of trees and the reduction in forest cover, a lot of the plans for sequestration have gone awry. And therefore, in just planting trees and ensuring that we sequestrate in those trees is a little bit of a risk. And many corporates, you will understand, are risk averse. So I will only say now that it is a program that is developing, but will take a little time to come into its own. On the information scene, yes, of course, information now widely available on the net. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs has a whole section devoted to CSR, and therefore a lot of happening in that space. But it must not be confused with corporate communication. My only difficulty here is corporate communication sometimes, I'm not saying always, is more to projecting more than what is actually done. So the thin line between corporate communication and information, that must not be crossed. All right, so let's take a quick look at some of the questions that have come up in the chat box. Channelized through SSC in future. Government is still dithering. In fact, one of the questions we asked to the very concept itself is that if you are having a social stock exchange, how can it be that CSR money will not be available? What are NGOs becoming members of stock exchange for if they can't attract CSR funds? And that's why you'll see that the number of entities which have actually registered with the social stock exchange is so few. But I am hoping that very soon that picture will change. My last interaction with the social exchange, NSE and BSE, are that they are actively thinking about it. Then, yes, we came to information. Micro funding for newly formed NGOs? No, it is not currently on the anvil anywhere. The idea is that unless you have a proven track record of at least 3 years, corporates are very chary of parting with their money to such entities. Correct, I agree with you that social stock exchange has some way to go before it becomes popular in any way. Right, so having said all this, the role of arts, I can't, sort of, it's a very subjective topic. I'll only say that in Schedule 7, the promotion of arts, the promotion of local handicrafts, handlooms, culture, all of that has been taken care of in Schedule 7. Let me give you an example. NTPC, for example, if you look at what they have done to the Konarak temple in Orissa, you will really be amazed at how corporate funding has been used to completely revitalize and preserve our heritage, centuries old heritage of our culture and civilization. So, with these words, I'd like to thank all of you for giving me a patient listening and to the Bengal Chamber of Commerce for giving me this opportunity today. Goodbye for now.
Sir, on behalf of Bengal Chamber and from the entire National CSR Committee of Bengal Chamber, we thank you so very much. Again, it was something new which we learned from you, which every time we learn. So it is it is a great moment for us that we always get your support. And this session was extremely engaging. And thanks to the entire audience who participated, you were so engaging. Still, questions are coming in. It makes a lot of difference. We will try to capture all the questions from the chat and collate it and send it to Sir. And as soon as we get his reply, we will try to collate those replies and send it to you all. So, on behalf of the chamber and on behalf of the entire committee, as well as from the audience part, sir, we thank you so much for giving us time and conducting this session. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you,
with this,
everybody. Such a pleasure. Delighted to have met all of you. Bye bye for now.
bye bye, sir. Bye bye, everybody. Thank you for joining.